Hey guys, it is Sean once more, and just like last video, I'm going to keep this extremely brief. My friend's cat has fallen ill, and well, I decided to use my platform to potentially assist. So if you have any spare change, even if it's something as small as $1 or $5, and you want to donate, then there will be a link in the description to the GoFundMe. Any and all donations are greatly appreciated, but other than that, enjoy the rest of the video. Everyone has an ego. You can look me in the eyes and tell me that I'm lying, but it takes some kind of ego to say that with any level of confidence. Ego bleeds into everything we create. The characters that align with our way of thinking always seem to come out on top. Our mentality and ways of thinking always seem to find their way into our worlds, no matter how much we try to avoid it. This is our ego. Our confidence in ourselves that we exude every time we share our worlds, tell our stories. Typically, in our narratives, we try to keep things subtle, never telling our audience to think a certain way, to believe in anything in particular, because in the same way that we write for the freedom to express ourselves, our audiences should have the freedom to believe whatever they want to believe. However, in spite of this, it's hard not to wonder what would happen if we indulged in ourselves, if only for a second, created a character that emanated the ego we so desperately wanted to share with our audience, a character who we affirmed with strength and blessed with the personality required to draw admiration from our readers and viewers. These characters, these lively personalities, how would they impose themselves on our worlds, leave an imprint in the audience's minds, one even deeper than the protagonists of our stories themselves? And why would we want characters so grandiose in our narratives in the first place? What is the purpose of ego? Jujutsu Kaisen is an interesting case as far as the discussion of ego is concerned. The story features characters that exude a lot of self-confidence, though that can't really be equated to ego in and of itself. The central cast of JJK seems to be much more self-centered as opposed to egotistical. There's no grandiose presence from any of the characters throughout the narrative, but quite the opposite. Nobody is untouchable, and everyone is just a cog in the machine, fighting because they have to, but otherwise not bearing that overwhelming, intense presence that comes with a traditionally egotistical character. There will be moments, sure, times where characters attempt to assert themselves as the exception, but these moments are fleeting and are honestly only good for a TikTok edit or two, assuming they're not dimmed to shit by the production team. This rings true for the majority of characters in the series, barring one man that is the exception and treated as such, not just by the main cast or the villains, but even the author himself, Satoru Gojo. The Honored One, or whatever you want to call him, is the perfect representation of how an egotistical character can completely turn the tides of your narrative, especially when held in contrast with those surrounding them. Gojo is the strongest, a genius in sorcery, and the closest thing to an instant win button the good guys have to offer. As of now, in the anime at least, Gojo remains unrivaled, so much so that his absence from the story completely changes the tone of the narrative from a fun battle shonen to a desperate fight for survival in the face of seemingly unbeatable odds. And while I'm not here to discuss the strength of Gojo himself, I believe this is all necessary to understanding my deeper point regarding egotistical characters and their purpose in your narratives. Gojo's ego is enticing because of how untouchable it makes him seem. Gojo takes on an angelic presence in JJK, his abilities working in tandem with his ego to turn him from just another strong character to someone who is aware of their own strength, lending his moments this feeling of soft intensity that can only come from battling somebody who wholeheartedly believes they are better than you. How then does the series offset the ego of Satoru Gojo? How does it stop Gojo from stealing the show completely with his overwhelming confidence and abilities? It doesn't, but instead, it meets it from the other end. The purpose of ego is to amplify a character's strengths and personality, giving them an increased presence in the narrative and creating a larger-than-life persona that actively controls the pace and tone of whatever plot they find themselves in. Gojo ticks all of these boxes, but there's one small problem. Gojo is a meta-fucking nightmare. He destroys any and all of the major villains in a fair fight, and so he's basically walking damage control. A character like Gojo can be difficult to write around because his strength virtually matches his ego, something that we'll touch on more later, and so there has to be some kind of counterbalance, someone to keep the scales from tipping too far in either direction, someone to clash with Gojo's ego. I promise this video isn't about Jujutsu Kaisen, but I would have to be a fool if I didn't mention Ryomen Sukuna. In the same way Gojo is the light, Sukuna is the dark, and it shows, once again, in his ego. Sukuna believes that he is the absolute strongest, just as Gojo believes the same of himself, but their egos differ in one key area: their application. Sukuna's ego fills him with the belief that with his strength comes entitlement to whatever he pleases, and this is shown during his romp through Shibuya, whereas Gojo's ego gives his presence a calm atmosphere similar to a flowing river. Sukuna's ego is one of malice, of a desire for carnage. Gojo is horrifying because there's always the knowledge that he's holding back, having his fun, but Sukuna is threatening because you never know if he's holding back. Sukuna owns his environment because of his entitlement, never afraid to fight against others and even taking joy in his engagements, because he never truly believes he's capable of losing. Losing in and of itself is an interesting topic, because it begs the question of what happens when these egos are challenged, when they're on the knife's edge of their own lives and they're forced to contend with the concept of defeat. What happens when these egos are shattered? Fragile egos are nothing new to villains, even those of today's media. When operating on the unshakable belief that you can't lose, someone is bound to make you eat those words, especially if their name is in the title of the show and yours isn't. Dio Brando from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure serves as the main antagonist of Part 1, Phantom Blood, and Part 3, Stardust Crusaders. In this video, we will focus on his Stardust Crusaders iteration because it falls most in line with our central topic, the ego. Dio, in spite of his popularity, doesn't really get much screen time in Stardust Crusaders until the final arc of the series. He's a glorified final boss encounter, and yet in spite of this, he outshines every other villain in the series put together. This is because of his ego, or more specifically, his personality, which is inflated by his ego, filling him with all of the extravagant flair of a vampire and the intimidation factor of any other villain in any other series. Gojo and Sukuna had a biblical ego, believing that they were above the people who surrounded them, looking down on them as a king with their subjects. Dio is in much of the same vein, but where he differs is that this path of thinking is his undoing. His otherworldly presence and interesting poses make him memorable, but in the show itself, anyone with a keen eye could recognize how Dio's lust for blood, his desire to torture Jotaro and his friends, gave our brash main character more than enough time to unlock the strength to match Dio, leading to his defeat. Dio's ego is used initially to build him up as a threat, his intimidating presence and unyielding confidence making him seem as unreachable as Gojo or Sukuna. But once that goal is reached, his ego crumbles, the cracks are visible, and his fall at the hands of the family he oh so despised is all but guaranteed. When crafting egotistical characters, it is easy to confuse ego with self-confidence, but there is a difference. Self-confidence is healthy, it's reasonable and limited, whereas ego is almost never-ending, presented as an absolute, and forces you to question if a character is truly mentally sound. Writing characters like this is a test in understanding what makes someone egotistical, what makes their ego intimidating, and how someone with absolute faith in themselves would act in any given situation, how they would clash with other characters and the like. With ego comes a human element, an element of indulgence, like a dog digging into a bowl of food. You gaze upon these characters in astonishment and envy, but also disgust and unease. The purpose of ego is not just to be laughable, but to be equal parts laughable and horrifying. My name is John Sage, and thanks for watching. Hello, it is Editing Room John once more. And as always, I would like to thank you for sitting down and watching this video. If you've gotten to this point, that means you've likely watched all the way through, so I would like to thank you for that as well, because you have absolutely no idea how much that helps me out. In the algorithm, just in general, for morale, just all of that shit. I guess first and foremost, I would like to talk about the editing process for this video. A couple of my files got corrupted, so it took longer than I would have liked to finish the video, but honestly, because of the pace I was on, I ended up finishing it on time anyway, which is exactly why this video is coming out exactly a week after last video. I'm hoping that this will perhaps improve my chances with the algorithm, perhaps give me a little bit of a boost, and overall just kind of, show a sign of improvement in my numbers recently. Especially since, I'm just getting off of the break, the time skip, whatever you want to call it. let's see what else. Oh yeah, I also took this video as a chance to kind of be a little bit more introspective about my thumbnail design, working on improving my numbers regarding that, and overall just making things better just as a whole, getting 1% better. I'm not going to keep you for too long because my viewer retention is probably already going to be like horrible this video anyway. But I would like to thank you for watching once more. Thank you for sitting through whatever it is I have made you sit through. And yeah, have a brilliant rest of your day. Peace out.